Welcome to Money on Tap. Money on Tap, your personal finance headquarters, where we bring out the professionals' experience and some fun in what we call three-dimensional investing, utilizing insurance, brokerage, and fee-based planning. That's what we do on this show. We look at all sides of the issues, and we bring a fully independent planning perspective to the table.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here with Dan Mickelon. We're both planners and partners at Brayshaw Financial, and you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. We'd love to connect with you. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, subscribe, like, those are the types of things that help us, but it helps you really find success in your investing, which is our goal here, is to really bring the information to the forefront for you to make the right financial decisions for your life. And if you're new to us on the radio, you can find us on the podcast venues out there, and SoundCloud, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, et cetera. They're all out there, and you can find us there, Money on Tap. We have a show today that's a little unique, and it's going to add some real perspective as you are trying to engage and find the right financial person for you. Or maybe you feel like you don't have the right connection with the right person. And there's kind of a hidden psychology driving your financial life, which is our title for today's show. And, that money mindset is really complex as you're trying to connect and cue the advisor to what you're trying to accomplish. And I think so many people are finding that disconnect, whether it's a personal investment belief or a psychology around it or just even a religious connection, Dan. I find that there's a lot of things that are kind of missing in the gamut of trying to find the right financial person.
Yeah, we all come into this financial relationship with our own personal experience with money, whether it's things that we've done personally, advice we've been given, just the experiences we have around finances in general, both kind of earned dollars, invested dollars, all those things. Nobody comes to the table a complete blank slate. So understanding, kind of that personal baggage you have, whether it's good experiences or bad, is kind of indifferent. It's really just about understanding biases or preconceived notions you might have on this topic that would factor into any discussion you have with somebody, particularly when you're just getting to know somebody, those first couple of meetings with an advisor before there's any element of trust there. Just understanding where you're at personally and helping the advisor understand how you can be best worked with, an important factor in building that right relationship.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that we've met with over the years that are like, I had this experience and I'm not sure whether I'm ready to make that move and, trust somebody with assets because I was failed before, or, it could be a number of variables that, cause that disconnect inside that. We've had different clients. Some people are pro oil. Some people are con oil, like they don't want oil investments in their thing, or they don't want a specific type of holding. So we have certain standards that we have in the investment world. And then also we try to, curtail some of this stuff to really meet people's needs and really try to understand that. But I've just found that there's a lot of disconnect for people as they're trying to really find the right person, because this relationship is a long-term relationship. This is something that when you find a financial advisor or planner, you really want to make sure that the connection is so solid and so sound that not only are they taking your interests at heart, but they can actually adapt to something maybe you specifically need, whether it's a type of risk or the objective of what you want for your estate, and trying to implement those things in a successful manner. And so that's a little bit about what our show is today. And we're going to really bring a lot of other elements to that are going on behind the scenes and that hidden psychology to driving your financial life. But before we dive into that, we have for you Money in the News.
Waiting for your tariff refund check? Forget about it. This is from Michael Hilsnick from the LA Times. And hey, there's nothing more front and center in the news these days than tariffs. For anybody paying attention, you'd be aware that the Supreme Court has recently struck down the tariff regime that Trump and the administration had been running since really he got into office. It's raised some significant sums of money, somewhere estimated between $135 billion and $170 billion. And this all relates to a specific type of tariff or a specific law that Trump had used to enact these tariffs. So it doesn't apply to every tariff out there and all of our import controls that exist. But it is the lion's share. It is the bulk of the money that's been raised and so vehemently touted and talked about. But the Supreme Court took a look at the law wrapped around that and the specific provisions Trump used to negotiate these different variable tariff rates with different countries based upon a whole host of factors, whether it's his conclusions about past treatment on trade, that the American consumers experienced, to geopolitical concerns. Trump has been using this to settle many issues, and it's been an effective tool for him in that regard. But the Supreme Court, again, took a look at the letter of the law behind his ability to enact these tariffs and has declared it illegal, which is a significant problem here. And one of the underlying issues and kind of core to the article here is, well, what about all those funds collected? Clearly, being that it's the U.S. government in play here, you better believe every dollar that was collected has been spent and is long gone at this point. However, the payers of these import taxes, essentially these tariffs, are legally given the opportunity here to go ahead and reclaim those funds. And for those companies that are public companies that have paid these tariffs, they really have no choice. Their shareholders would demand that this be the case, essentially, to recoup those funds. But kind of core to the article is, well, what about the American consumer, right? Because no matter who you look at, there's a number of different bodies that have analyzed this. And the estimates vary, and there's obviously political slant in all of this news. But anything I've read would suggest to you that somewhere in the 80 to 95% range of these tariffs, of these revenues, has been essentially passed on to the American consumer. So you have these companies that are going to begin lining up to request a refund on all these importers on the tariffs that they've paid to bring goods into the United States, which were then sold to the consumer, and having us consumers cover the majority of that cost. But the consumer did not directly pay the tariff. We paid more than we should have. We had an extra tax that was supposed to serve a purpose, but now we're going to have to give it back, right? And we're going to have to add to our national debt in order to do that.
So I had to pay it, and then they're going to get the money back anyway, so they're going to double win.
Yeah, and so the retailers out there that have paid that freight, then sold the product to us, recouped some percentage, whatever percentage you want to believe, of their expenditure back, they're going to claim 100% of the tariff paid back. And the reality is that they very likely are not going to refund us or pass that through to us. And you've got a couple of governors of different states, the governor of Illinois, who's very much politically involved and potentially in a presidential run. Well, he's already laid claim on behalf of his state for $8.6 billion in supposed tariffs paid. And then the finer points are, nobody really knows what they've paid. Now, certainly from the consumer level, we have no idea. We just know we pay more. But to break down specifically, what portion of each and every expense we've made was due to a tariff is literally impossible. And a lot of these importers themselves, they'll have to work through that math. But 1,500 or so companies have already come forward and laid claim, filed lawsuit here to recoup that. But many of them, and Costco specifically listed here as one of the major players who import a ton of goods, but they're not even able to put a number on their lawsuit at this point. But they know they better get in line here because if anything is to be paid out, there'll probably be some funds set aside that will quickly diminish. The administration's pushed back, and the key to the article here is Scott Bessent, economic advisor to the president, who's been a champion of this tariff regime. And this article is for sure slanted, being out of the LA Times. I think come to expect that a little bit. But they make light of his relatively smug response to all of this, saying, well, you can try and sue us. We're going to stay tangled up in court for years. And I don't think the American consumer is going to get one nickel of this back, is essentially what he said. Well, actually, that's pretty darn near a quote is what he said. But, as the consumer sitting here and whatever you feel about tariffs, I wasn't a believer going into it. I think it's done some good things. Even if it does require me to pay a little more for goods, I feel like, there's been some upside to us as a country from a defense perspective and economically speaking. We've had this promise of reshoring manufacturing and a lot of investment coming back on board for these, importers to us, exporters from where they're at to avoid these tariffs. But really, none of that has begun yet. There's none of that realized to the American consumer, the American public at large. And now all of those deals are very much up in the air and have been, essentially struck down, need to be renegotiated. But Trump's not going to have nearly the power at the table to refine these deals and to bring people back to the table. One of the Supreme Court justices who dissented on the opinion here, wrote into his dissent, this is a mess. This is a significant mess.
Yeah, and they turned it over, I'm sure they were very happy, but the trade court of what was it? The
International Trade Court.
International Trade Court, and they're probably going to have to look at each one of these individually. I mean, 1,500. I mean, they're just getting started. I've been talking for years that we're potentially going to be seeing a national sales tax as a possibility in a way of recouping funds, just because of Roth IRAs and all these different things that are going to be taxed, quote unquote, tax free. Tariffs are really just a way of implementing a sales tax. So I really think that we're staring at one or the other. The outcome is going to be the fact that, we have $38 trillion in debt. It's going up. We have $100 trillion of potentially of unfunded liabilities, future liabilities, mine and your, Dan, Social Security. There is a need for revenue. So one of these things is going to happen. Trump is following up with this new announcement last week of basically a new 15% tariff, which will be around for about 6 months until hopefully it gets put into place by Congress. I mean,
zero chance on that.
There's a lot of pushback on this, but I think, at some point in time, maybe some version of this goes through, because at the end of the day, if someone's going to buy a Lamborghini, they got to pay a sales tax. If you choose not to buy a Lamborghini, then you don't pay the sales tax, but there's going to be something coming down the road. And we have to either embrace the idea of a tariff or a sales tax, because I don't see any other way out of this.
Yeah, and in the State of the Union address, Trump finally said it out loud. I mean, I know this has been a kind of a target of his, and there's some economic theory that supports this that's a couple hundred years old, so I'm not sure how relevant it is these days. But, the notion that, he's so gung-ho for these tariffs because it will ultimately replace our income tax system here in the United States.
That's not going to happen either.
That's crazy. You can't grow the economy large enough and import enough goods to have that to be true. And I don't know.
Well, I hope that's true, but I don't think it could.
Yeah, no, it sounds fantastic. Someone's really going to have to prove that one to me. I don't see how it's tied to reality. But yeah, this is a significant mess, and for sure the American consumer has gotten the short end of the stick here big time. And the chances of any of these prices actually dropping or refunds being offered either by the federal government or by the retailers that we spent our money with are virtually nil. I mean, the article pointed to one when there was a tariff applied on washing machines. The price of washing machines rose by 12% at Whirlpool when we bought them. They correspondingly also raised the price of dryers by 12% in that same period of time who were not under tariff. They did it because they could get away with it, because we buy washers and dryers together, and it would make sense that if one went up, so did the other. But dryers were not affected by tariffs, and they raised them by 12% anyway. So these same people are going to give us a refund?
Yeah.
Unlikely.
No, that's for sure. Next up for you, we have from Fox Business, Eric Ravel, Novo Nordisk to slash list prices for Ozempic and Wegovy by up to 50%. The Danish pharma maker of Novo Nordisk will cut the list prices to around $675 per month, effective January 1st, 2027. Wegovy faces 50% reduction in Ozempic, 35%. They're also price cutting Belsus tablets, which is, the other piece of it. And, this is also $675. I mean, a lot of stuff going on here inside this. And this doesn't change the list price on the self-pay cash piece. So it's a pretty interesting article with all these GLP-1 medications and weight loss and so forth. I mean, you and I were talking about like this whole medical piece was designed for people with, cardiac stuff, which is crazy. Like it was all about that. And then they found out, oh, this works for this and oh, it works for that. Well, I don't know about you, Dan, but this is the fastest growing pharmaceutical segment in history. Everyone's trying to get into it. People are like late to the ship, are still trying to do it because it's just so many people want these drugs, and it's scary. I don't know. I mean, do you lose twice as much weight with half the money off? I have no idea.
That's an interesting one. But a couple things are shocking here. But one of them was that the article claims here that there's 100 million people living with obesity in the United States and 35 million with type 2 diabetes. I mean, that was quite the comment in our culture here. It's astonishing that we're at those kind of levels. But this price cut has to do with the drugs that will be offered through Medicaid, Medicare, kind of the large institutional opportunities, not the direct payer people who are paying out of pocket for these drugs. However, they have pledged to make these drugs available through Trump RX, which is a direct pay option, and there are some discounts built into that, so the price will drop there as well, though not by these same levels.
I just the whole idea of just taking a drug to lose weight, unless it's medically necessary, I just struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like it wouldn't change your habits forever, but I don't know. I mean, people love it.
Me?
It seems
I'd
to
be
be
eating
working.
a gallon of ice cream a night.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking the guardrails completely off, but fact of the matter, it works, and these drugs were developed for kidney issues, diabetes, and cardiac issues. The weight loss was simply a side effect they didn't anticipate, but hopefully these drugs do the job on their actual core purpose, which would be good news for all of us. Up next, Bloomberg. AI panic is an opportunity for stock pickers, Morgan Stanley says. This is written by Rose Henderson. And we went through a bit of turmoil in the AI space. We spoke about it on last week's show, specifically software companies that the market and the analysts alike, suddenly became of the opinion that AI might invalidate or make their ongoing subscription services less valuable from a revenue perspective. And so we saw a sharp drop in those stocks over a couple of days span last week. And so a lot of people have taken a step back from that, taken another look at that, refocusing, their opinions on AI and where, some of this may have been potentially an overreaction. And this analyst at Morgan Stanley, specifically in that school of thought, he says that, AI, this drop has created an opportunity for people who have not yet been in that space to potentially get into it now at a reasonable price. And he highlights a couple of sectors where he thinks, separate from software, that AI is still undervalued and holds a lot of opportunity. Speaking specifically to insurance companies, the consumer finance world, which is credit cards and lenders in general, and bank stocks, where he thinks that AI is going to have a real productivity and profit boost that hasn't really been fully realized in these stock prices yet.
Yeah, I think about this. Everyone was talking about how much money AI was going to bring to the underlying holdings. And then meanwhile, we have this kind of head fake inside the market. Now everyone's like, AI is going to destroy us all. It's kind of interesting. But I would basically break this article down to, don't worry, fake panic, real charts, hey, it's all an opportunity. I mean, that's what they're saying. This is a buy signal. I'm not sure I'm entirely there. I'm not running from anything, but there's a lot of movement inside the marketplace that has suggested, hey, if you missed out on getting into some of these companies and you feel like, hey, I always wanted to be in this one, and this pullback, and you think that there's an opportunity for it, now is probably a good time to look at it for sure.
Yeah, I'm forever looking, but I kind of had my AI picks in, and a personal reaction. I'm talking about my own personal investments. I didn't sell anything because of this downturn, but I didn't buy anything either. So I'm just kind of riding it out.
Well, that makes you one of two. Hey, don't go anywhere. We're going to come right back with the hidden psychology driving your financial life, and really trying to break into what gets to the bottom of why you make the decisions you make. How do you fulfill the financial goals and agendas you're looking for? If you have questions about that, you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. We'll be right back after this quick break. Are you ready to take control of your financial future? Look no further than Brayshaw Financial Group. Our team of experienced advisors is dedicated to helping beginners like you build wealth through smart investing strategies. Visit BrayshawFinancial.com today to start your journey toward financial independence. Brayshaw Financial Group, your partner in wealth creation.
Thank you for joining us for Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's show with Ben and Dan.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here with Dan Michelon. We're talking hidden psychology driving your financial life, and there's so much behind every decision you make. And I mean, whether it's from your childhood, whether it's, you didn't grow up with something or you did grow up with something, there's just so much that drives every little financial decision that you you face in life. And so we're going to talk a lot about money mindset today, and really what is, driving those expectations, those goals, all of that, and really just try to bring it into place so you can find somebody to work with inside the space that matches that. Because I think ultimately, so many people out there say there's a disconnect here. There's something not working. There's a communication flaw, or they don't understand me. I think that's the piece that a lot of people come to the table with. And, from a financial perspective, it really comes down to finding that match, finding that person, that place. Dan, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all those things are true, but it's not necessarily, I think, the case that you have to perfectly align and have the same money mindset as your advisor. But I think it's very, very important that your advisor be aware of your money mindset as well as you yourself, and that you're aware of your advisor's money mindset. I mean, certainly there are advisors out there that are just very aggressive in their stock picking and whatever the case might be. It certainly wouldn't be a fit for everybody. But I think the vast majority of us from the advising world and from the client world, we're kind of in that middle range where it might not necessarily be an exact match. But as long as we can acknowledge where everybody's coming from and what perspective they bring to the table around their personal experiences with money, with wealth, with investing, experiences they've heard, stories they've heard. I think it's important in those initial meetings when that bond of trust is being built that if you have any of that baggage that those kinds of quiet voices in your mind whenever you personally think about investing, you hear those voices, they hear those stories come to the surface, share those with your advisor, make sure they're aware of some of the things that they're operating in the background that might make it particularly hard for you to make a decision in a direction one way or the other.
Yeah, and then to add to complexity, usually most people are married or have a significant other, and that adds another dynamic.
Two mindsets
that really say, well, I don't really think they understand what our goals are. And no financial planner is going to understand you perfectly, but finding somebody where you can have a conversation about the depth of what your goals are and where those types of things are coming is super important. It really has to do with some of the first few meetings when they're really diving into knowing you and understanding you and trying to comprehend what all of that means. And so we're going to go through a few mindsets specifically that just to build some frame of reference here. But the scarcity mindset, there's a lot of people that have grown up with very little. And sometimes, a husband or a wife is that person or both. And, there's never enough. Like it just, no matter what the number is, they never had enough money. They don't have enough money now. And they're in constant fear of spending, something that probably can echo in almost everyone's soul, right? And so, but then there becomes a high anxiety about financial security. And I think that's really what drives poor decision making. When you're operating out of a fear-based, anxiety-based system, it really doesn't lend to being, a successful opportunity. I mean, you buy a stock, it always goes down, right? I mean, it's just it's the nature of the beast. You're never going to find the low, and you're never going to sell at the high. And when I was becoming a trader and learning this world a quarter of a century ago, it's hard to say that, Dan. They were always telling me it's like you never make the highs and you never make the lows. You are buying within the guardrails of the market. And you always have to know that when you buy something, it's going to go down. When you sell something, it's always going to go up. And if you happen to land perfectly on one of those, it's because some other big investment firm or hedge fund actually just set the bottom because they just dumped a ton of shares. They're the ones that set the highs and lows. You were just playing in their game. And so you have to understand that and know that you're never going to get a perfect bottom.
Yeah, and then the other end of that is the abundance mindset, right? People who are the perspective that, opportunities to earn and make money and take advantage of are always out there. Even if you miss one and it goes by, well, the next one's coming. They have this perspective that the opportunity to find success and to achieve is always there, and they're always ready and willing, and they're comfortable taking that risk. They have the ability to make calculated decisions with a kind of a longer frame of reference, a longer set of expectations, and we call those things time horizon. So they're comfortable taking a risk and recognizing that, the benefit of that decision might not be felt here today or tomorrow, might be well down the road, but they just have that ability, that mental ability to weather the storm, take advantage of those opportunities, and just not fear the day-to-day, the ups and the downs of the market that are sure to come. People with this abundant mindset have the ability to set that aside and just wait it out and have the perspective that every decision they make is going to be a winner.
Yeah. The avoidant mindset is probably, I would say, the scarcity is probably top. I would say the abundance is probably, farther down the list. But the avoidant mindset, where that person that just says, I can't look at it. I don't want to see a bank statement. I don't want to see an investment statement. I don't want to do anything. They avoid budgeting. They find themselves in bad financial circumstances last minute, and they just feel overwhelmed by the idea of calling a financial planner or engaging with somebody to say, what do you think we need to do? And if you're in the avoidance space, that is a very dangerous place to be because you can avoid for only so long. And I find that people who are in the avoidant mindset find themselves saying, I wish I had done something sooner if I had known.
Yeah, I think those people that, kind of find themselves in the biggest messes of their own making by just not paying attention to things and just kind of wishing it all away. But, that's really not a strategy. But the status-driven mindset is the fourth one here, and that's probably the most problematic one in that, people are driven to make decisions and to create goals and have focuses that aren't really tied to their own reality. They're looking out into the world and they're saying, hey, if these people have that, I should too. And they're willing to make decisions with their finances to achieve those things that, leads them in a position of taking undue risk, to overspending, to creating financial hardship, trying to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, when it's not really a part of their own personal financial picture.
Yeah, and then the last one we have, the fifth one, is the faith-driven mindset. And that is somebody who is concerned about, how their money is allocated. What are we buying? How is that really accomplishing and supporting my faith? And then there's the, goal perspective for that person. Where are they? What are their goals? I mean, are they looking to, either increase stewardship, giving, those types of things? I find with a faith-driven mindset, it can have some, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but some naiveness because it can lend to shift a little bit into, either the abundance or the avoidant, for either personal concerns or, I want to, I've met people who want to give more than they really can give because, hey, I'm retired and I've got all this money. And so it's hard, honestly, and sometimes in the faith-driven mindset, to engage somebody in a state to say stewardship has a balance. And I think it's a perfect amount of tension in between both what you're doing for yourself and how you're meeting your faith-driven goals. So that is usually a very interesting perspective. It's somebody, I actually have a client where, Dan, years and years ago, I remember we bought like a hotel ETF, basically, and but that also included some hotels that had gambling inside it, and so we had a conversation about that, and we were able to remove that allocation. But that wasn't the focus to buy gambling stocks; it was just a hotel, and right. Caesars and MGM was part of the hotel chains that they owned. But that ETF owned, hundreds and hundreds of different hotel brands, but it wasn't focused on that. And that's not something we intentionally engage in, nor do we ever look for. Same with, tobacco and alcohol stocks. Those are things that, we're not looking to invest in those types of things. And so you have, faith-driven allocation space is a very common conversation. And then the, tithing and giving and working through those things and trying to understand that there's a balance between both creating your financial well-being and the giving opportunity inside that. People want to give 10%. Hey, that's fine. I've had clients who have called me and said, hey, I've got all this money. I just want to, XYZ is doing a big fundraiser for something, whether it's a building or a church or a, Christian school or something like, and I want to do XYZ gift. And I'm like, well, that's far beyond your means, and sometimes they're like, I just need to trust God because I feel like this is the Holy Spirit pushing me to do it. okay, I have a stewardship conversation with them, but I have to appreciate and respect that. So there's a lot of little different pieces inside all of these different mindsets, and trying to work through them and give everyone the best balance we can. I mean, sometimes when someone has an abundance or think they have an abundance and they don't, we have to kind of engage that. If somebody is, avoidant, but they happen to call us and so forth, we have to start talking to them about, hey, you need to open your statements. We need to have conversations. We need to have regular meetings. These are the types of things you need to do. And the scarcity mindset, if one spouse doesn't want to spend anything, we have to talk about, financial well-being and what does that mean and how do you take care of each other?
Yeah, and why does all this matter? I mean, why does whatever your mindset happens to be matter today when you're looking at these decisions? And it is critically important because it's going to drive you to make those determinations as to whether you get invested or you sit idle on the sidelines and you just say it's too risky for me, I'm just going to step aside. So that mindset and triggers decisions along these lines that can have an impact that really plays into whether you're capable or in a position to build long-term wealth. So things like your risk tolerance is going to be driven from this. Your ability to sit down with people and negotiate salaries and pricing and just have frank, upfront conversations about money and personal finance in a way that it doesn't trigger you to avoid and run away from this situation. And those are all dollars. A dollar saved is a dollar earned, and these opportunities exist. But you have to understand where you're coming from to enhance your ability to be not only vocal about money, but express these feelings, express these concerns, to the people and to the parties that matter, around financial conversations, like your advisor.
Yeah, and I think this is where the stress levels get the most addressed, because we've had Jerry Vincent with Family Builders and different people on over the years who have, educated us. I mean, that, financial matters are in the top one or two issues in almost every struggling relationship. And so that is a real issue and something that if you can, step out of your, what you find to be comfortable into something that might be uncomfortable, like if you're an avoidant person and you say, I want to give you guys a call, or, you are a person who's, living in a scarcity mindset and your spouse is saying, we need more food for the kids or we need to eat better or we need to do these things. Like you have to be able to find a balance in some of these things. And you may be 100% right. That's the whole thing. Like, one spouse might be in the abundant mindset and one might be in the scarcity mindset and, not really taking into account, shopping at TJ Maxx every day, So those are the types of things that, we really try to work with people on and try to find where the common ground is and be that kind of bouncing board for somebody to say, what do you think about this? This is our situation. This is what's going on, which is why we ask for financial questionnaires and we ask for statements and how are you invested? Because all of that stuff gives us a real good understanding of what people think. I mean, as people are kind of going through this stuff and saying, this is what we have, this is what investments are investments. And it doesn't really matter to us, but it helps us understand if somebody's money is all sitting in CDs or a savings account making even a 0% interest rate, that tells us that they're living a little bit of fear. But if somebody says, hey, I've got all my money in, highly aggressive stocks, and, I don't know if any of these are actually going to make it, then we might say, hey, maybe you need to turn back the dial a little bit. And so there's a balance. I think everyone kind of understands both of those realms, but really finding that perfect tension between risk and opportunity and concern and fear and all those different things and making money, like those are important things. And then wagering those into your psychology of what's driving some of this stuff and bringing that into focus is a big deal. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. Don't go anywhere. We have hidden psychology driving your financial life. More to come.
Hey, this is Seth Krussman with Brayshaw Financial Group. Are you looking for a hassle-free way to invest? Look no further than Brayshaw Financial Group. With Brayshaw Financial Group, you can start investing with as little as $100 and enjoy a user-friendly platform with diverse ranges of investment options. Visit Brayshaw Financial Group and start your investment journey today. Brayshaw Financial Group, investing made easy.
We appreciate you listening to Money on Tap with Ben and Dan. You can contact us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's program.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here with Dan Michelon. If you're just catching us on the radio, you can find our podcast out there on all the major podcast venues. Feel free to reach out to us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. We're talking about the hidden psychology driving your financial life, and we just went through a number of money mindsets, whether it's, scarcity, abundance, avoidance, status-driven, or faith-driven mindsets that, drive the underlying motives, I would say, not in a negative way, but motives inside, what is really pushing you in one direction or another. And, there's a lot to this piece, but really our goal is to help you really just uncover a lot of what's going on in your head as you're trying to engage and find the right financial professional for yourself.
Yeah, and you might have heard those descriptions as we just kind of rolled through them, and just whether you'd considered it or not, said, "Wow, I am this money mindset," but that doesn't feel or sound like it's going to be productive for me going forward, or maybe you're just kind of some acknowledgement to your biases and preconceived notions about money and investments. And the kind of light went on to say, that's not a place that I'm likely to find success within. So the question is, can you change your money mindset? Is that even possible? And like lots of things that we, all go through therapy and prayer for, yes, it is possible.
Well, I'm just thinking about the avoid mindset. If you just realize you're the avoid mindset, don't say, well, I'm just going to avoid this some more.
Yeah, well, they already turned off the radio, so they're not listening anyway. They're avoiding it altogether. But, if you find yourself in a mindset, or you've come to the acknowledgement of where you're at, but it's not where you want to be, can you change that? And absolutely you can. It is going to take some work. It's going to take some further self-realization, but it can be changed. And so if you're walking away from this with a simple comment, well, hey, I'm just bad with money. Well,
I hear that all the time.
Yeah, but it can be true in a sense, but it's not something any of us can really just sit there and accept and live with. If you think you're bad with money, well, you need to get good with money, or have someone that you can truly rely upon and trust who's good with money.
That's like a contractor saying, I'm really bad with a saw.
Yeah, I mean,
I can't swing a hammer.
It's just a reality, and if it is true, you just have to fix it. I mean, there's no other way around it, or else you can just face financial doom at every turn. But one of the key ways to do this, I mean, there's a couple little techniques, but start with tracking your spending, right, without any kind of a judgment. This isn't about analyzing every decision in real time. Just live a week of your life, and then take a couple hours after that to look backwards and say, well, where did I spend my money this week, right? And this isn't about lamenting any particular decision. It's just about a little introduction to reality, just getting your arms around the numbers and the habits that we all have. And just so that it just brings an awareness. Again, this isn't about judging. This isn't about saying, well, that was a bad move or a good move. It's simply about bringing awareness to the table. And then learn some basic investing things to reduce your fear of it. I think that's a massive hurdle for people, whether it's through the media or stories they've heard, personal experiences. People can have just an unnatural fear of the investment world, and the idea that they take one step in, they're immediately going to be fleeced for all their money, and they're just so that those things. I mean, there's horror stories everywhere, so don't get me wrong on that, but the vast majority, I mean, that's just not reality. I mean, that's just not what happens. So you need to find people you can trust and people that mesh with well, but you can change your mindset and you can work your way through some of these fears that will allow you to take better steps forward to improve your situation, build wealth, without harboring all of these things that, it's stories they've heard, maybe, but they didn't happen to you.
Yeah. I would say, Dan, it was coming to me kind of, off of our track here, is that I always do respect people who are interviewing a number of financial professionals, because it gives them a perspective of differences. And a lot of it's about relationship and connection and really feeling heard, and I think that's the piece that drives a lot of real decision making inside that. And I would encourage people to, lean on those, perspectives, because it really does help when you feel heard. I mean, you want to make sure that the person's, competent and capable and so forth. Those are obvious things. But then once you really bring that to the table, feeling heard is important. And, so I do respect people who say, hey, I'm interviewing, a few financial professionals. The other thing I really do respect is somebody who asks for references. I think that's important. And we all know, like, if someone gives you a reference, it's going to be people who speak well of them and so forth. But that's not why I'm saying that. The reason I think references are really important is because you can find out how those people were helped. Right. And if they were helped with because they, I really didn't understand my finances well, or, I thought I had a scarcity issue until, I met them and so forth. Those are the things that you're going to find are going to be truly valuable. Not whether or not, they made me a lot of money or this, those things, have some expectation, of course, but really understanding how people were helped is super important inside the reference space.
Yeah, and advisors are great at this, and I speak of us here, but our profession in general. They're going to help you uncover those hidden beliefs. They're going to, in an interview with an advisor who you've been able to share some of your past perspectives with, and when they take a look at the portfolio you have right now or the simple lack of one, there's a lot of things that can be gleaned from just that. Like you made mention before, if someone is either all in cash, well, they're ultra conservative in a way that's hurting them, or if they're all in, penny stock, well, they're ultra aggressive in a way that just isn't wise. It's just that's not a track that doesn't sustain success. So, between the combination of what you have on paper and those initial discussions where you can acknowledge some of your money mindset issues and experiences you've had, an advisor can help you weed through some of that and introduce you again to the reality of what you presently hold. And some of the potentially false notions you have of experiences you've heard about, it gets you on a clearer path to make decisions without all that baggage and help you move forward. But, you made a good point there, Ben, about people who interview multiple advisors and what does that process look like? I think it's a great question to sit down with an advisor and when you say talk about references, after that kind of introductory couple of minutes where we've reviewed assets, discussed background, ask your advisor, hey, listen, how have you helped somebody like me before? Specifically like me, what have you done and what can you do for me? And that might be one of the questions that, kind of helps alleviate some of the fears because, we've seen so many people over the years and everybody is unique. Don't get me wrong. Everybody is unique. But at the same time, we've probably, I'd say 99% chance worked with somebody in a similar circumstance that we can relate to and describe to you, what it is that we did in that particular circumstance and what the outcome looked like. Yeah,
and I was just thinking, as you're saying that, Dan, I was talking with somebody who reached out to us from a referral recently who has an abundance mindset. And they do. They have quite a bit of money. But the truth is that they have quite a bit of money for now. And they're very, very conservative in how they're invested. And I'm thinking, I look at the numbers and I know that they're on a dead end road. And I've tried to communicate that to them. Like, if you don't take some steps that are different here, you're too conservative. Yeah, you have enough money for the next 5 or 10 years, but you're in your 60s. Like, 20 years from now, we have a problem. I've run it through multiple financial, calculators. I've run it through financial planning software. It's like, hey, there's a dead end road here, no matter how much you do this. And, but they believe they have plenty of money, and that could be true. But something's going to have to give. Either they're going to spend less because they're running into that dead end road, or they're going to have to figure out how to make more money. And so, there's lots of ways, no matter where you're at. And you might be listening and saying, yeah, I've done well. I've made a good living. And how do I translate that into retirement? Because we have spoken so many times about how there's a difference between the accumulation phase and the distribution phase in retirement. And as you enter that, and there are two different ways of investing. They completely involve different strategies because you're taking money out versus putting money in. And so you have to really appreciate what those do and why they're different. And we have a video on our website at BrayShawFinancial.com, which is I'm thinking about the Dan, I'm just blanking.
Sequence of returns?
The sequence of returns video. I think it's the first video on the video list. It's a great video to watch just because it shows the disparity of two people investing the same exact way with the same exact income needs and just a couple years apart in their start dates. And one runs out of money and one's worth a ton of money. It's pretty incredible when you start looking at how distribution and the market really matters and trying to mitigate that. But, we're not, behavioral therapists, but a good financial planner, a good financial advisor will identify the patterns that are going on to help you become self-aware of the mindset either you're carrying or how you're engaging your money. Because it is a tool. I was joking around about the hammer a second ago. It is a tool that we all have. We all are supposed to use. And if you're of the faith-driven mindset, it's something you're responsible to be a good steward with. And, that is, money's talked about in the Bible so many times. It's ridiculous. And if you're not engaging that in a way that's bringing health and awareness to you, it's something that's should be concerning. And so we really try to track where this is coming from, trace that back, try to figure those things out. That should be part of your conversation with any financial person.
And one of the real benefits of working with an advisor, regardless of your mindset or whether you attempt to change it or not, or if it even needs changing, and not to suggest everybody does, but they're going to be able to separate emotion from strategy for you. We're all emotional about our own money.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. And there's a reason that a lot of advisors have advisors, because we're human beings too, and we have that same hurdle where if it's a decision that we've made, it's money that we've earned, we hold on to it maybe a little too tight sometimes, and it's harder for, even advisors to have that leap of faith and relinquish control of their assets, or not that it's even total control, but to even be open to that outside advice. And it's critically important, for us to be able to look at someone's portfolio. We're fiduciaries. We're pretty good at what we do, I think. We want to be a good steward with you with your assets, but we're not as emotionally tied to your money as you are.
You're listening to Money on Tap. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. We'll be right back. We're going to close out the hidden psychology driving your financial life, getting around that money mindset. I think this is really valuable.
Hello, everyone. This is Dan Mickelon of Brayshaw Financial Group. Are you looking for professional guidance to kickstart your investing journey? Look no further. Brayshaw Financial Advisors are here to help. Our team of experts will provide you personalized advice tailored to your financial goals. Visit us at BrayshawFinancial.com today and schedule your free consultation. Brayshaw Financial, investing made easy.
We appreciate you listening to Money on Tap with Ben and Dan. You can contact us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. And now, more of this week's program.
Welcome back. You're listening to Money on Tap. I'm Ben Brayshaw, joined here with Dan Mickelon. You can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. If you're just joining us here on the radio and missed a portion of the beginning of this podcast regarding hidden psychology driving your financial life, you can find that on all the podcast venues out there. I would say that there's, Dan, as we're kind of closing out the show here, self-sabotage is a big issue for a lot of people, and it's not necessarily recognized, something that really kind of needs to be brought to the forefront. But sometimes people make more, so they spend more, and then they just constantly have that, stuck feeling inside that. Sometimes people who are avoiding their finances, the avoidance doesn't take the anxiety away, right? So the more you avoid, the greater your anxiety, not the other way around. And so that's an issue. And then, people who set goals, they just quit. Like one little thing happens and then boom, they just run away from it. Those are big issues, I think, in the self-sabotaging space. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you see that a lot. People get all hyped up to engage in a financial plan. They get really committed to it. They have a lot of energy and excitement about it. And the first move goes wrong for whatever reason, and they immediately quit. The whole house of cards comes down.
Or they lose a job, or, car breaks down and they were saving $50 a month or something.
Yeah.
It's like life doesn't just instantly change. I find that a lot of people just don't even engage us when those setbacks happen. It's
amazing all that work that they've put in and that excitement. They just throw their hands up and walk away from the silliest little setback. It's unfortunate.
So many people after the fact, you hear about these things and be like, hey, listen, this is one way we could cure this or resolve this or fix this or address this. And they're like, oh, gosh, I wish I had called you sooner. This is so much better. I mean, that I hear regularly too. I tell people if you have any major financial decision, sometimes I'll be like, if it's, depending on their income level, $5,000 or $10,000 or something that's going to be, monumental to your plan, like we should be called.
Yeah.
It's not a charge. It's not a fee. I want you to call me because I want to understand what's going on. Hey, my son or daughter got into XYZ college and I really like this as a good opportunity for them. It's going to, let's talk about it. There might be ways to do it. I had somebody who was looking about, we got a request to take money out of an IRA. It was a lot of money and it was going to push them up a tax bracket. And I said, hey, you can literally do a personal loan for, I think it was like $45,000. And, they were going to pay a bunch of taxes. And I said, you can take up to a $50,000 loan in your 401k. I mean, it's not going to cause you a tax bite. They were so ecstatic. I mean, they were, but that was what they had to do. And it was a reason for it.
But hearing you tell that story, like my own little personal, concern or pet peeve there is like, call us at the decision point, not the raise cash point.
Yeah.
Like, let's,
right, exactly.
Before the contract is signed and the commitment's made and we're left with, well, where do we pull the money out of? Kind of engage us in some of those decisions front end because there might be a simpler solution before you overcommit yourself to a tax consequence you just weren't considering. But that's the idea of having an advisor to kind of defer you away, steer you away from some of these self-sabotage opportunities, because we'll have a little bit of accountability for you. We'll have design a system instead of relying on willpower and decision making. We'll create the guardrails, not set up a budget necessarily. Everybody hates that word, but that conversation will create awareness around what are you able to spend without throwing your whole plan into some kind of a wreck right off the bat.
Right. So as we close out this here, I want to talk, Dan, about matching the advisor to your style mindset. I think that's really what people are looking to hear about specifically. So we've talked about the different mindsets. We've talked about that. But, Dan, why don't you start with the anxious or fearful?
Yeah, if you're anxious or fearful, you want to find an advisor who emphasizes behavioral coaching. They have a downside protection strategy. They're able to engage you in that conversation of, well, what happens when things go bad, right? That's what the fearful person needs to hear, just to understand that there's a plan in place for that. And they're going to want frequent conversation, right? There's someone who's fearful and has high anxiety around dollars. They're not going to want – you don't want an advisor who's interested only in checking in once a year. You want someone who's available to you on a regular basis.
Yeah. Growth-oriented. So if you're growth-oriented, you're going to really want to look for somebody who's a strategic planner, somebody who's looking at, the overall picture, figuring out how to grow your assets. And this is not just somebody who's like a good stock picker. This is somebody who's looking at the overall picture, somebody who's engaging in tax planning and asset allocation and alternative strategies, somebody who's doing long-term modeling. These are the types of things that if you're growth, you should, really, focus on those pieces. Tax is really probably one of the ones I would say is the most leveraged, though that's really where we focus pretty heavily. And then, ask, how do you construct a portfolio and, how do you adjust my income, if I need increases? Those are the types of questions that should be, rolling off your tongue when you're working with an advisor as you're trying to figure that out.
And if you're avoidant or overwhelmed, you want someone who's highly focused on service, right? Who has simplified reporting, who isn't making this task that's already personally a hurdle for you into some kind of monumental technology leap that you're just not prepared to make. And someone that's got a very clear step-by-step process. We're looking for bullet points. We're looking for simplified. We know this is a difficult topic for you, so we're not trying to encourage you to spend hours and hours dwelling here. Right.
And if you're the achievement-driven, which usually when I meet people who are achievement-driven investors, they're usually business owners or executives. That's a big piece. And in the business owner piece, you really want somebody who understands that type of planning, because that's really what's going to drive it. Most of the people who are achievement based, they own real estate, or they have, their own little small business, or they have a side business on top of everything. They're really pushing the envelope as far as they can. And that's really where you're going to need specific advanced planning strategies. And then finally, the, faith-driven person, you're going to really want to find somebody who aligns well in understanding your faith. And if you're a believer, a Christian, and you are engaging in that, and you have some real calling to specific things, you're going to want to have somebody who understands giving and tithing and some of the faith-driven concepts and what stewardship means inside maybe a biblical context. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. We want you to be successful in your investing. If you have questions, you can reach us at 855-226-8551 or email us at info@yourmoneyontap.com. Thanks so much, and we will see you next week.
The views expressed are not necessarily the opinion of this radio station and should not be construed directly or indirectly as an offer to buy or sell any securities mentioned herein. Investing is subject to risks, including loss of principal invested. No strategy, product, material, or tool mentioned can assure a profit nor protect against loss. Please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information, products, materials, or tools mentioned should be relied upon when coordinated with individual professional advice. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. This show may be subsidized in whole or in part by a product sponsor or issuer. Securities and advisory services offered through Osaic Wealth Incorporated, member FINRA SIPC, and a registered investment advisor. All other services offered through Brayshaw Financial Group LLC are independent of Osaic Wealth Incorporated. Osaic Wealth Incorporated and Brayshaw Financial Group do not provide tax or legal advice. Main office is located at 116 South River Road, Bedford, New Hampshire 03110, and can be reached at toll-free 855-226-8551.